Today I'm going to be talking about Gemini CLI for content. Gemini CLI is a way to access Gemini through a command line. And the advantage of being able to do that is that you can do really complex tasks very quickly over large volumes of content. So what I've done here is I have a few short form blogs you can see on the left, and I have Gemini CLI pulled up on the bottom. And the way Gemini CLI works is it's just a command line. In that command line, you write a prompt just like talking to Gemini. And that prompt is going to call tools. So right now we have these 5 files. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to try to remove all of the typos in the files. Of course, since Gemini actually created all of these files to begin with, there aren't any typos yet. So I'm going to introduce some typos artisanally first. And I'm not going to say that Gemini will catch all of the typos in these docs, but honestly, I've always found it to be really accurate. This is one of those things where I think it's an excellent use case for AI. The reality is that if you were going to do this manually, it would take a lot of time, and it's likely to be more accurate. So now I type into the command prompt, I type in Gemini, fix those typos. And Gemini reads the files and then writes into the files to correct them. And Gemini is going to tell me what it's doing as it goes. So you can see here that it's highlighting the sentences that have typos in it, and it's highlighting its corrections as well. Now, if I had already approved its tool use, it would also be asking me at each step whether I actually wanted to edit that file. But because I already approved it, it's just going to edit all of those documents and remove all the typos. I use this example to show you how Gemini can move through a lot of doc sets very quickly. Now I'm going to ask Gemini to add some source links to this content because everyone loves source links. Now this isn't going to ground Gemini because Gemini has already created this content. Gemini is instead going to look for links that validate what it already has. So this is the kind of thing that you need to be really conscientious of how you're using this tool. You know, the AI can always be wrong, and human expertise is always going to be the most important thing. But for instance, if you already had a list of sources that you had used to prepare these documents, you could use this to intersperse those sources throughout your documents. And again, you can see that Gemini is going to go through all of these files for me. It's going to do all of the updates for me. The update's going to be remarkably consistent. Now I'm going to do something a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complicated, and that's that I'm going to ask Gemini to optimize for SEO. And again, you know, Gemini is going to do the best that it can, following the best practices that it sees in its training data. But what Gemini is going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to do things like look for the most relevant keywords, and it's going to intersperse those keywords through the headings and through the paragraphs. And what you're going to see here is that Gemini is actually considering the whole of the content. When it edits the introductions and when it edits the exits, it's actually referencing other pieces of content. So it's kind of optimizing the entire bundle. Now, obviously, for true search engine optimization, you would want to do a lot of this yourself, but I think that this gives a great example of mundane tasks that sometimes they just have to be done. If you have 20 pages that need to be search engine optimized, is it super valuable for your time, or can you do something that's good enough and that's going to move the needle right now? And the other thing I had Gemini do is I had it list out the keywords. So now I can go to this keywords.txt file and I can take a look at it and I can see, you know, what keywords it used in each file. Finally, just for the heck of it, let's have Gemini turn all of those pages into a website. Gemini is great with content. Gemini is great with code. And again, these aren't things that are intended to replace anything that we're doing. It's intended to accelerate. And the thing that I really like about Gemini CLI is that working with a chatbot feels like a passive process. I'm asking a chatbot to just do things for me, and it's spitting back these things. Now, working with Gemini CLI is a little bit more iterative. It tells me exactly what it's doing at any given time, and I can interrupt the process if I want to, for instance, to give it more guidance. There's a lot you can do to automate and guarantee quality with Gemini CLI. One of the things that I've been using Gemini CLI to do over large doc sets is to simply check for broken links. Another way you can use it is to just check a bunch of content against your updated style guide. These are things that would take a lot of energy to actually do on our own, but they're really just mundane tasks that we can automate. And that's, I think, the area that Gemini CLI and a lot of these other tools really perform best at are these areas that are these mundane routine tasks, but they're a little bit too complicated to just create some sort of automated script or macro. And you can see here that it actually did make, a decent website from that content that we had just edited. So stay tuned. I'll be discussing a little bit more about how you can use Gemini CLI for content and documentation in the future.